It's been a while since I just sat down and ranted about a thing, probably because it's been hard to find anything in the entertainment sphere that raises my rage levels above the 2020 baseline, but for some reason, Netflix's new live-action Winx Club monstrosity really set me off. I don't think it has all that much to do with the show itself. When I was younger, I watched a fair bit of Winx Club, but I wouldn't really call myself a fan. It was just kind of there between all the anime on 4Kids TV and more entertaining than whatever YTV and Teletoon had in that same time slot. Still, I enjoyed what I did see of it. Its fairy-centric fantasy world was unique and well-realized, its characters had bold, appealing personalities and designs, and from what I remember, it had pretty solid action and comedy. I haven't really thought about Winx Club in almost 2 decades, but I appreciated it enough to immediately understand that this shit is but a pale imitation of the real deal. Literally, because they whitewashed half the cast. But that's not what got me going, at least not on this rant. Neither is the Tecna erasure, although I'm pretty sure she was best girl, so that's a big loss too. There are a lot of things that bug me about the minute I've seen of this show so far, but what I hate most is the broader trend it represents. Why do we need this? Why do the Powerpuff Girls have to come back as strung-out teenagers? Can we not try an animated reboot where they just don't twerk first? What about One Piece? Do we really need to see Tony Chopper as a realistic reindeer? And we're doing live-action Avatar again?
Yes.
Did Hollywood not learn its lesson the first time? Okay, it's easy to blame this on the handful of big companies that have oligopolized global pop culture and keep doing these terrible things to all the cherished intellectual properties they own, but at the end of the day, all any of these companies care about is money. If we, collectively, did not spend more money on these new bad things than we used to spend on the old good things and currently spend on new good things, then they'd be doing something else. Beauty and the Beast, the should-have-won Best Picture undisputed classic that defined an entire generation and kickstarted a new golden age of original animation in the early 90s, grossed $440 million at the box office, $792 million in 2017 money, which is the same year that Beauty and the Beast, the soulless, cynical celebrity vehicle that pretty much everyone agrees was at best kinda mid, grossed $1.264 billion. With a B. And lest you think modern animated classics are immune to this, the 97% fresh, award-winning Into the Spider-Verse grossed $375 million against the franchise-ending Amazing Spider-Man 2's $709 million, which is just embarrassing for our entire species, honestly. The problem isn't just that studios keep coding bright, fun cartoons in gross layers of realistic grit and grime, it's that a lot of people seemingly prefer them that way, or at least will not seriously consider the alternative. Now, maybe my perspective on this is a bit skewed on account of my profession and how many times I've seen live-action adaptations go wrong. I know there was a time when the idea of live-action Dragon Ball, and indeed live-action Avatar, was the most exciting thing in the world to me. And to be fair, looking at fuzzy little Detective Pikachu does still give my brain the good chemicals even today. But even so, I've gotta ask, what's the hang-up? Why is it so hard for so many of us to simply appreciate animation on its own merits? And how do we fight the misconceptions and stigma that got us here? Stigma. Stigma balls. Fuck it. I'm a child. That's why I'm making this passionate argument for cartoons, because I am a child. Before I give you my thoughts on that, you should know that today's sponsor, Discord, allows you to share your own with anyone willing to listen. And they can be about anything. Anime, video games, movies, YouTube videos, theme park rides, theme park food, the Dewey Decimal System, trees, you get it. Discord is in the business of building and hosting an ever-growing network of custom communities that you can easily access through their free app. Chat to your heart's delight and share your art, photos, and other creations on text channels about subjects as specific as you can name, drop into and out of group calls in dedicated voice channels for gaming sessions, watch parties, or just general shit-shooting, or pull your friends into more temporary private chats to collaborate on projects and have more intimate conversations. I use Discord on the daily to communicate with friends and coordinate the creation of these very videos, and the Mother's Basement community has its own server full of absolutely lovely people with channels for art, music, gaming, anime, and more. We're not the only ones either. If, hypothetically, you like anime, there are already hundreds of dedicated Discord servers just waiting for you to join them, and it is easy as pie to make one of your own. Click the link in the doobly-doo to download Discord and find your community today. After you're done listening to me talk, that is. Anyone who watches anime will leap to tell you that the idea animation is just for kids is laughable on its face. Most likely, they'll then immediately point whoever said the wrong thing to Akira or Ghost in the Shell or something similar, films that explore violence, sexuality, and other adult aspects of the human condition in a vivid, imaginative manner that live-action film struggles to match. It's an easy case to make, since Hollywood tried and failed to match one of them with a very high-profile flop back in 2017. Still, I don't think that it's a particularly convincing argument to anyone outside our fellow otaku. If it were, we wouldn't have to keep having this conversation. Akira and Gits are both great movies with interesting things to say, but they're also niche, overtly geeky properties with a cult reputation that are every bit as easy as cartoons for the uninformed to dismiss out of hand. I do think we're on the right track with them, though, because in addition to being very popular animated films that children very obviously should not watch, they highlight a lot of things that animation has to offer for, well, everyone. The wild, imaginative, immersive world of Neo-Tokyo that Hollywood struggled to effectively realize on modern computers and a $110 million budget was originally brought to very convincing life on paper with ink and paint for a little over a tenth of that, about $16 million adjusted for inflation. Animation makes it substantially easier and more economical to realize basically any setting or scenario you can imagine that's not real-world present day. And that strength is by no means limited to the genre fiction that nerdy man-children like me love. You know, I've heard those respectable adults enjoy their period dramas, and animation can just as easily transport us to any time and place that has ever existed without spending a dime on sets or costumes. Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju is a dramatic, compelling tale of life, death, and legacy centered around a declining traditional one-man performance art and told across decades, from pre-war Japan up through the end of the Showa era in the 1980s. It's a wild journey that would be very difficult to tell in live action without a lot of money. And that is just the tip of the iceberg. From Demon Slayer and Samurai Champloo to more serious fare like Basilisk and Sword of the Stranger, you'll be unsurprised to learn that anime offers samurai stories for literally days in every flavor you can imagine, mature and childish alike, and I genuinely do not think that any works in any medium have captured the civilian horrors of the Second World War more effectively than Grave of the Fireflies and Barefoot Gen. Of course, anime is not limited to Japanese settings either. Baccano is basically a Quentin Tarantino movie set in 30s gangland New York, with some detours into the 1700s on a boat bound for the Americas. Emma, a Victorian romance, kinda explains what it does for me with that title. This year's Arta follows a passionate young aristocratic lady trying to make it as an artist in the working man's world of 16th century Florence. The heroic legend of Arslan is a tale of epic historical warfare set in an obvious analog for 4th century Persia, and forget Assassin's Creed Valhalla, you will not find a more immersive and compelling portrayal of Viking life and Viking warfare than last year's Vinland Saga. Of course, cartoons and anime aren't going to win out in terms of realism over Hollywood CGI or AAA graphics, which are also animation, but you get what I mean. You do have to engage your imagination a bit to fully immerse yourself in any of these settings, but that has its upsides. With your disbelief already suspended, you're more receptive to events fantastical, impossible, and highly improbable, and one thing animation's very good at is bringing such events to life. That of course means high-flying beam battles and mind-bending magic shows, but it also applies to awe-inspiring aspects of our own reality. Selling a devastating devastating, world-shaking earthquake in a major motion picture can cost millions. In animation, though, it only costs as much as a few hundred drawings. And yet, the quake in the first episode of Japan Sinks 2020 strikes me as more shocking and brutal than just about any scene in any disaster film I've ever watched. And looping back to Barefoot Gen, this one scene will forever color how I imagine nuclear hellfire. And you know, I really don't think a more realistic, high-fidelity rendition of the same events would hit the same way. Yeah, it'd be wetter with more exposed muscle and bone and all that gross, unsettling stuff, but I cannot imagine anything better conveying the feeling of your final moments stretching into an agonizing eternity as your very atoms are stripped away than this sequence of drawings with this line work and this stark shading. And there are other benefits to the inherent abstraction of animation beyond selling spectacle and helping us comprehend the incomprehensible. By simplifying the human form, streamlining our expressions and motions, yeah, you lose a bit of the nuance of a live performance, but you can also isolate and amplify emotions well beyond the limits of mortal meat. The most obvious example of this is animated comedy. Cartoons can just push slapstick and exaggerated reactions way farther than live action. And this is one area where your average American adult does seem to appreciate the medium. Raunchy animated sitcoms are big business after all, but it can hit just as hard going the other way, jerking those tears straight out of their ducts. The last 10 minutes of Anohana, or for any non-weebs watching, the first 10 minutes of Up, are a testament to just how raw and powerful animation can really be. This is another place where everyone does seem to be in general agreement. Google saddest moments in film and you'll be hard-pressed to find a list that isn't laden with Disney movies, and you probably don't even have to think about it to name an animated movie that hit you hard right in the feels. Perhaps these moments just stick with us because they get us when we're young, or maybe the heightened imaginative mindset animation encourages also makes us a little more receptive to emotional sincerity. I speak from a lot of experience when I say that this power doesn't diminish with age. I can also say with confidence that it is not at all limited to simple emotions. Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju is a full-blown existential crisis that will make you think about things you don't want to think about from angles you never even considered. So is BoJack Horseman, for that matter. There are a lot of enriching adult experiences to be found in animation. But there are also a lot of enriching all-ages experiences, and enriching experiences aimed squarely at children. And I think a big mistake that a lot of animation detractors and fans alike make is dismissing those experiences out of hand to focus on all the adult stuff that I've just talked about at length. Nothing I've said so far really addresses the problem of stuff like The Winx Club and Powerpuff Girls getting Riverdaled. Those shitty, gritty live-action remakes and reboots happen because people want to enjoy new content based on very kid-friendly concepts. I mean, clearly, just look at how much money superheroes and fairy tales make, just with a bit of plausible deniability. I'm gonna drop a hot take here. It is normal, good and healthy even, for adults to enjoy things made for kids. And not just things that were made for kids when they were kids, because let's be real here, a lot of you motherfuckers are spending a lot of money on vintage Pokemon cards and whatnot right now, and I know that pretty much everyone watching this has spent at least a little bit of their pandemic time watching something from their youth in order to briefly escape from the hell year. But escapism and nostalgia are not the only value to be found in these works. Some of my favorite pieces of media over the last few years are cartoons I've watched on Netflix, and not just the one about the alcoholic horse. I've talked before about how The Dragon Prince feels like a proper spiritual successor to Avatar. Klaus is a pitch-perfect Christmas movie that outstrips just about everything from my childhood. Kipo and the Age of Wonder Beasts comes the closest out of pretty much any post-apocalyptic media I've seen to capturing the very specific vibe of Nausicaa, albeit in a more lo-fi kind of way. Hilda is straight enchanting. There's nothing I can really compare it to off the top of my head, besides maybe Rupert and Tintin, kinda. It's pure adventure distilled onto the small screen with trolls and rat kings and all-consuming sentient void creatures. Good shit through and through. And then there's Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which is pretty much peak television. It eschews the story and lore-driven style of other recent TMNT adaptations. Wait, I guess the one from the early 2000s isn't recent anymore. Oh god. In favor of telling tight episodic stories with an almost Looney Tunes feel to them. But also, it still has heavy continuity and lore. A lot of stuff is implied to happen off-screen between all the interesting bits that we get to watch. And this formula results in both the best comedy and the best action of any iteration of this franchise, bar none, while still delivering some really good character development. If you can get over your hang-ups and engage with cartoons like these earnestly, you may be surprised by how much you take away from them. I know that's easier said than done. We all cringe when we think about our younger selves, and things that remind us of the sort of things we liked back then, but that aren't the specific things we liked back then that we have nostalgia for, are inevitably going to invoke that reaction. But you know, when I contemplate which parts of my youth I cringe the hardest at, the many years where I laughed my ass off at Nick Splat slime and fart jokes, versus the moment I convinced my friend his birthday would be better spent watching a comedy for adults like The Love Guru instead of kiddie crap like Wall-E, it's not even a question. There was a distressingly long period of my life when I thought Zack Snyder was a mature, thoughtful director, whereas now I recognize there's more emotional depth and artistic nuance in that one episode of the Justice League cartoon where Batman talks to the terrifying psychic girl about her own mortality than his entire grimdark filmography put together. Also, Warner Brothers Animation did a better take on Lex Luthor bamboozling Superman and Batman into butting heads way back in 1997, and you'd probably be better off watching either of those instead of waiting to be disappointed by the same movie twice, but you do you. I've come to realize that what appealed to me in Snyder's movies, and a lot of the stuff I was into during my late teens and early 20s, was the aesthetic of maturity. The violence, the swearing, the horny, things that signified the media was not for children, which freed me to enjoy watching the action figures bang together without worrying about how I looked to my peers. But I also could have just not worried about that and enjoyed myself. I often see familiar sentiments echoing through the online anime community. A common refrain is otaku decrying kids shows like Boruto as they sing the praises of more mature anime like Attack on Titan. And the thing about that is, Attack on Titan is literally a cartoon for children, or if you really want to split hairs, teenagers, the original manga is serialized in Basatsu Shonen Magazine, that's Supplemental Magazine for Boys in English, a monthly spin-off of Weekly Magazine for Boys that also runs series like Aho Girl, Animal Land, Oh Maidens in Your Savage Season, and The Heroic Legend of Arslan. To be fair, Kodansha's magazines do seem to skew toward a slightly older demographic than the competing Shonen Jump, with darker themes and a bit more bloody violence, but to be balanced, it ain't that much older. If it was actually aimed at adults, Attack on Titan would have been published in a seinen magazine, typically differentiated from their shonen counterparts by having real half-naked ladies on their covers instead of cartoon ones. Also, they usually have the word young in their titles because seinen roughly translates to young man, which is a bit confusing, but that's all beside the point, which is that in Japan, it's generally understood and accepted that teenage boys want to look at blood and titties as much as anyone, if not more so, and that there's good money in providing that service to them. Instead of deciding who gets to read what based on arbitrary aesthetic signifiers of maturity that puritanical American doofuses deemed too hot for kids to handle in the 1950s, Japanese publishers sell comics and anime and games to demographics they believe will best understand and appreciate the stories being told and their underlying themes. So you can have an anime or manga where a college-age loser falls in love with a softcore escort and frequently sees her and her coworkers in various states of undress, or a dude gets into increasingly complicated sexual situations with his two adopted sisters, one of whom is his teacher, and have both be shonen because they're kinda immature when you really get down to it. And on the flip side, a sweet high school rom-com about two borderline narcissists trying to trick each other into confessing first that makes a running gag out of its lack of fan service can fit comfortably into a seinen anthology because its storylines and humor are kind of complex and mature. Now, with all that said, being for kids doesn't mean Attack on Titan is empty-headed, just that it's accessible. It explores what trauma, loss, disaster, fear of the other, propaganda, and societal militarization do to people on a mass scale, which is pretty heavy stuff. It just unpacks those ideas in a way that young folks can understand and engage with. And clearly, that doesn't make it any less interesting to a vast number of adults. The same goes for One Piece's exploration of power structures, exploitation, and good reasons to light flags on fire. The way Mob Psycho grapples with failure, self-improvement, and empathy. And Spider-Verse's handling of loss, responsibility, and the importance of acting when you have to act, whether you're ready or not. Avatar: The Last Airbender is many people's go-to example of a show that talks to kids without talking down to them. It tackles cycles of abuse, systemic violence, war, genocide, propaganda, and fascism in a way that anyone can understand without diminishing their impact. It's also got lots of snot gags and penguin sledding. And while a lot of Avatar fans scoff and roll our eyes at those bits, framing them as something you have to get through to get to the good stuff, something I've said in the recent past before rewatching the whole thing, Avatar really wouldn't be Avatar without them. And not just because they balance out the serious stuff with some much-needed levity. They're essential to making the whole thing work. Aang's childish antics are a coping mechanism. He goofs off to avoid thinking about his responsibilities and other difficult adult stuff. That's why, right after he's unfrozen, he wants to go penguin sledding instead of, ask what happened to the air nomads. It's why when he gets to Omashu, where his best friend who's either 112 years old or dead lived, he runs off to hijack the slides. It's why these zaniest episodes of the whole series, Nightmares and Daydreams and the Ember Island Players, come in the immediate lead up to its absolute darkest moments. The tension between Avatar's serious, emotional content and its goofy cartoon nonsense for kids is Aang's internal conflict. So if you try to make a movie or a dour prestige drama out of Avatar that casts away those childish aspects to focus on the serious fantasy world building the adults are here for, all you're gonna do is ruin the whole thing. On the other hand, if you embrace those aspects for what they are and try to have fun along with Aang instead of pretending you're above it all, you'll come away with a much more complete understanding of the series' themes and characters, and probably just have a better time watching it too. Same goes for One Piece, only with reading, because the anime really draws out and ruins a lot of the gags, although in my opinion, not as much as trying to make it live action will ruin most of its action and world building, since all of that is predicated on it being a cartoon. Long Ring Long Land's a banger, don't at me. Okay, I'll be honest, I was really rambling and struggling to find a way to wrap this all up, but then I saw that a far better influencer than myself, Korone, recently said that her favorite anime is Curious George. Yup, same Korone. And, look, if you don't think you'd be happier and more fulfilled if you lived your life a little more like Korone in both a spiritual sense and a physical tummy full of fingers sense, I don't know what to tell you except that you're objectively wrong. Embrace the cringe that makes you happy, reject the cringe that revels in mindless misery, and go watch some good fucking cartoons. I'm Geoff Thew, professional shitbag, signing out from my mother's basement.